Good morning, everyone, and a happy St. Patrick's Day to all. We are going to be talking about disaster recovery today, and thank you for everyone who's thought that this topic was important enough to attend today. Chris and I will be presenting along with Wendy from our inside sales team. Josh, Jen, and Greg are also part of the support staff, which you may have talked to on the phone. Like always, everyone is muted at this time. We will, there's a chat box so you can type in questions, which we will answer at the end of the presentation. And there's always a survey at the end that we really appreciate it if you give us some feedback. We do have another webinar coming up in May, and having that information as to what you'd like us to talk about is very, very helpful when creating the next webinar. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about the most frequently asked questions when coming to your disaster recovery system. We're going to start with the planning. We're then going to talk about your physical offsite storage of your records. And then we're going to talk about the Hyland Recovery Service. And then at the end, we'll talk about the last-minute news from our friends at OnBase. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to get it started.
Well, good morning, everybody. Top of the morning. Well, hopefully your disaster recovery plan is a little bit better than Dilbert's. If you're running around screaming for help, and that is your plan for disaster, then you're not going to lead to success. So what we're hoping to cover today is very broad, high level, all the things that you should be considering for your organization, and then narrow it down to a little more specific of what you can do for your OnBase solution in particular, along with, as Jen mentioned, the physical offsite records. What are you doing with some of your physical items that you have stored in your building today? Because, of course, all of you have those corners or gaps where you have boxes stacked up that very rarely you maybe have to access, but are still important to your organization. So what are some things you should consider when a disaster strikes? Well, disasters come in many shapes and sizes. There isn't just one size, and of course it always happens at an inopportune time. And given the current local events, well, worldwide events of the tsunami in Japan, obviously very catastrophic and putting a test to a lot of disaster recovery plans there. They can come in as environmental disasters such as that, or there could be a simple fire, perhaps a flood. Obviously, with all of this warm weather we're hitting now, floods are prevalent in many areas, especially on riverbeds and coastlines. Or you could get a physical break-in. You always hear about people getting broken into and having things stolen from both hardware, not typically paper documents, but that could happen as well. And, of course, there's remote attacks. For those of you that have had identity theft, it's a horrible, horrible thing, but it does. People have done it, and, of course, it's a big deal to get everything back in order. It could even be like denial of service. Any kind of electronic interface that goes through and attacks your data is a potential disaster. And of course, the most common, hardware failures. So you can lose a hard disk, which is a very common thing that happens, along with power supplies, power outages, your network goes down. Any of those kind of disasters affect your business continuity, and that is not good. And then, of course, there's human errors. That never happens to anybody in this room, and I'm sure nobody on this line ever has that happen. But in the case that there's an accident, that is another cause for data loss. So it's something that you want to take into account when you're creating your disaster recovery plan. And then last but not least, anything like a disgruntled employee or strikes, like the Untitled on strike right now, legal actions or other organized criminal activity. We've seen embezzlement cases lately in the news, or what's happening up at our Capitol right now. And those types of things can cause huge disruptions within an organization and potential data loss, which of course costs the company money. So to help prevent that and to get rid of this really scary look on your face, because you might be staring at your screen going, oh my gosh, with all these bad things, what could possibly be happening? Well, here's where it breaks down. A study showed that the hardware or system failures accounted for 78% of the data loss. Which that kind of makes sense. We've all experienced, and I know I've lost photos vacation photos because of a hardware loss. My hard drive died. And that's not any different than your servers. They all have hard drives and they do fail at some point in time. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So keeping your hardware up to date helps reduce that. Human error is 11%. That seems a little bit high, but it's true. So those mistakes of getting data into the system and saving it counts for 11% of data loss. Nobody likes having to redo their work again. Amazingly, natural disasters such as floods, fires, tsunamis, earthquakes only account for 1% of all data loss. That may have gone up after this last earthquake, but as of the data, it was just 1%. So not very likely that that's going to be your cause, but it could happen. And one thing you always want to keep in mind is that your backup tools and techniques that you have in place today aren't always 100% reliable. And the only way to ensure that it is reliable is obviously to test it on a regular basis. Now, one question we get asked a lot is, what are the types of things you should be backing up? People say, oh, I've got my Veritas running or maybe a third-party application backing things up. But do you actually know all the things that you should be considering when you're doing your backups? Well, at a high level, do you know the type of documents that are being stored in your OnBase solution today? Knowing what departments are using it and what types of documents have in there will drive the types of solutions you need to have for backing up your system in the time of a disaster and what you need to be restored and which departments are maybe most important and what are the most business critical departments that have to be done first. Additionally, if you have workflow, you need to consider all of your different workflow processes. How do the documents get into those workflow processes? Who is responsible for those processes? And how do they get out? Obviously, you can do a workflow export to preserve some of that data. And if you do a full backup of your databases, you're going to get a lot of that there. But those integrations are key to understanding what your workflow will do, like a user form, for example. And do you have other third-party integrations? Oftentimes it's forgotten that your OnBase solution ties into a line of business app that would be used for cold or dip and or workflow. And having those third-party integrations up may be just as critical as getting OnBase back up and running in order for your solution to continue on with business after a disaster. And when was the last time you had a system audit? I know some of you have been very, very good about getting a system audit. It's one of those services we provide in PSG to go through your entire OnBase solution and figure out exactly what you have for server hardware today, how much storage you're using, what types of documents, keywords, workflows, all of the key pieces of information about your system so you know exactly what you have at the time of a disaster. And we provide you a long report, most of them are at least 30 pages long, with some details about your system today and then where you're looking in the future state and then provide recommendations on that. That's a very key component that is valuable for you when you're creating your disaster recovery plan and can be and is included with many of our tier support agreements. So it might be something that you actually are included with your tier support today you could get for free. If that's something you're interested in, you can always contact PSG to schedule. So at a high level, what are some of the other things you need to consider from a disaster recovery planning stage? Well, you have to ask yourself some questions, because obviously not every disaster is the same. So what happens, like if your building was destroyed today, where would all your documents be sent? If you're receiving mail today for your cash receipts, for example, where would those go? Do you have a backup site at another physical location? Would your employees, how would they access data? Would they just work remotely with a laptop and access the system, a remote system that's hosted elsewhere? Or, and who is responsible for each phase of those disaster recovery plans? That's the other key component is as you develop this plan, you have to assign a responsibility of who is going to do each phase of that plan. And where will your communications come from? Are you going to do cell phones? Are the cell phone towers going to be there? What kind of equipment are you planning to use to communicate? Are you going to do multiple forms of communication? Most people select the multiple forms, but because they'll have some method of getting that information out to everybody that's affected. And how long, probably the most important question of them all, how long can you afford to be down? Because of course, with everything, there's a cost. And that cost is directly related to how long you can afford to be down. So if you can only be down for a couple of hours, obviously you want to put in solutions with high redundancy and high availability that oftentimes cost a little bit more, but afford you business continuity at a much quicker pace. If you can afford to be down for a couple of days, then you can look at solutions that are not so high availability and cost less. And then most critically, do all of your employees know or understand the DR plan? I know internally we've done our DR plan and we're executing changes internally and have now begun communicating that out to employees, and we're going to be running a full test on those plans because, of course, there's no plan in place that's going to cover 100% of everything, but if everybody's on board with the plan, has a clear understanding, it reduces the amount of thinking they have to do at the time of a disaster. And when was the last time you reviewed your plan? Oftentimes the specs, as you'll see in some examples we're going to provide you, there's a lot of detail in there, and that needs to be reviewed regularly. The first time you create it, of course, is quite painful. There's a lot of information, a lot of details you need to flush out. But once you have that, reviewing it on at least an annual basis, if not a biannual basis, to ensure all the key players that are involved are still involved, and any key business processes or documents or things that need to be accounted for are still included in that plan. And how will you get your data in the system? Oftentimes people will remember that they did backups, but if you lost all your scanners or your line of business app and you could not do your DIP anymore or scanning anymore, how would documents get into the system to continue processing? Or would it truly be just an archival, retrieval kind of situation at that point? So consider how you get data into the system so that you can have that in as your disaster recovery plan as well. Include any third-party integrations like SAP or any of your line of business apps that you include with your OnBase solution today. So at a high level, this is what a disaster recovery plan provides you. Obviously, an ounce of prevention goes a long way. So you want to mitigate and prevent as much as you possibly can. But obviously, there's many things outside your control, and so in that case, you can loop around to preparedness. So having a disaster recovery plan that you know and have accounted for, and everybody else knows, having that preparedness in place will make the response much easier for everybody in place and minimize the downtime that you're going to experience within your organization. And it could be as simple as a network outage or a server outage, all the way up to a much larger catastrophe. But having that preparedness and then a response will make the recovery a very smooth one. So understanding that circle will make your disaster recovery planning much easier. And of course, you've heard it in many sports themes before, there's no I in team. And a lot of places today might only have a couple of people responsible for managing a disaster. And we want to challenge that and say there's several operational type things that you should look at creating teams and have them cross-functional across your entire organization. So you would have a disaster management team responsible for the overall management of the disaster at a high level, but then there would be an operations team dealing with everybody that's within the operational group. Maybe a network team, so they would be all your network facilities. So if the network went down, they would be managing that disaster. The facilities team, so your actual building and your structures, they would take care of all of those. Communications, because of course you need to be able to have lines in and out, internet access, and all of those types of things. A team dedicated just to that would be helpful. And perhaps a standby facility. So if you're fortunate enough to have a hot site you can go to, an alternative facility, having a team dedicated to making sure that those facilities are up and available to your team in the operations would be very helpful. So take a look at your organization and get some key players involved to make sure that each one of those phases can be considered and addressed. And some people might be on multiple teams, depending on the size of your organization, but you want to make sure that you can address all those areas. So at a high level, what are some things in case you do run into a disaster? We've seen a few customers who've had to endure some disasters. What are some things you want to consider to make sure that you're ready? Well, obviously, we've been talking all about having a plan. And the plans can come in many shapes and forms. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about an example that we have here. You can get them from your insurance companies often, but you want to make sure you have a detailed plan outlining all the responsibilities and all the things that will need to be covered. And oftentimes those plans trigger thoughts that you maybe never even considered from both an operational standpoint, like an OnBase solution, to the entire organization. And then assign responsibilities and test that plan. No plan is going to be considered good until you've tested it. I know when we were going through our first phase and we tested it out, we found a whole bunch of holes that we needed to fill, and I'm sure you will too. So by testing it, you find those. And then, of course, you want to do regular updates, usually at 6-month intervals, because the updates don't take that long. You get done in a short meeting to go through everything, make sure nothing has changed dramatically. So you want to make sure you're going and doing that though. And then you want to test it again to make sure everybody's still on the same page. When you were in school and you had to be the tornado drills and the fire drills, those were all done so that in the event, however unlikely, in that event, you would know exactly what to do without thinking, so you'd be safe. And that's basically the same thing we're doing with the disaster recovery planning. And we're going to talk about some third-party resources that you can leverage to help with your disaster recovery planning. You want to take those resources and leverage those at the time of a disaster. There's lots of companies that provide help. We're going to talk about a few of them today. But those third parties resources should be leveraged so that you don't have to absorb all of the disaster recovery on your own. And make sure you allow your disaster recovery plan for scalability. Because not all disasters are the same. So if it's just a network outage and you have a network outage disaster recovery team, it makes it very efficient to be able to address those. And it can consider things like communication. How are those being addressed and sent out? How are they being fixed? And who's responsible for all of those pieces during the time of one of those disasters. And you'll notice there's a link down the bottom of the page, and this is just one example of a sample discovery recovery plan template. And Jen will open that up for us now. It's a fairly lengthy document. It's literally 30 pages, and they do tons of details in here and give you hints on the types of information that it's seeking while you fill it out. So basically, there's a lot of these on the internet. This is just one example I wanted to share with you. And obviously, the presentation will be available to you after this is done, so you can leverage that link. But it goes through all the different things to consider, bullet point by bullet point, from where's going to be your command centers, who's responsible for what, if there's a standby facility, all the way through the various pieces that are important that we're discussing here today. So there's nothing that will come as a surprise. Again, this is just one example that you can leverage. You could get something from your insurance company or other sources. I know they sell software as well to help guide you through the process. But if you don't have anything detailed out today, I strongly recommend at least that you review this and leverage a lot of these details when you go through your disaster recovery planning. And with that, I will turn it over to Jen to talk about backup strategies.
Well, thank you, Chris. All that wonderful information you've already provided. Well, now we're going to talk about some different backup strategies that you can employ at your organization to make sure you have this data in case of a disaster. First of all, do you know what you should be backing up as far as OnBase goes? OnBase runs off a database, so you'll want to make sure that you have the MDF and the log files, or the LDF files. These are very important to recovering that database in the case of a disaster or an instance where we need to recover that information. You're going to want your image files, your user forms. It'd be a good thing to have your App Enabler configuration XML file if you are using App Enabler. Your VRS profile. Now, currently, there's not a way to save them off right now, so you want to make sure that you have screenshots and have that document readily available. Scan formats can now be exported through newer versions of OnBase, so you'll want to have those exported scan formats saved somewhere so that when we bring your scan stations back up, you'll have all the settings and you'll be ready to go. Lastly, if you're using the web, having your configurations for your web server would be a good thing to have. That way you're not just guessing when we start up and then having to make changes later. All right, so here's a couple options. DVD and tape, Old Faithful as we call it. Many people have been using DVD and tape for years, and it is a very easy way to get all of your data and information backed up. Now there's disk backup, which these days is very, very cheap. It doesn't cost a lot to have a lot of disk space, so therefore this is a very cheap option, and as you will see, could be a very good option depending on your situation. Then there's the hosted disaster recovery plan, or a service. Now, service is guaranteed in most of these instances, so if you can spend the money and you want high availability, this is a great option for you because your systems will be up in a very short period of time. And then data validation. Insurance for making sure that you're actually getting the information you need. Nothing is probably worse than having a disaster and thinking that you have all these backups and realizing that the backups are all full of corrupted data. All right, we're going to start with your DVDs and tape backups. Now, these are great for small amounts of data, so you probably don't want to use these if you're trying to back up terabytes, of data. But for small amounts of data, these will work very well. It's very good to keep them in a secure off-site location. If your building gets burnt down and your tapes are in the building, it kind of defeats the purpose of having them as backups. You're probably taking, if you're doing a DVD backup, you're probably taking those every night. So you could lose, if you have a disaster before your backup is taken on a given night, you may lose that whole day of data. So that's something you need to consider for if that's going to be an acceptable loss for you going forward in your disaster recovery plan. Recovering from a tape backup can be slow, so you need to think about when you need to be up, because if it's going to take that tape a day to back you up or a day to restore, you're going to be down for a whole nother day. So you need to think about that when thinking about your recovery plan and what's acceptable. And then the life expectancy of your media, we say about 7 years reliability. So you want to think about that if you've had your tapes or your DVDs for long periods of time, because they may not be as reliable as they once were. And then disk to disk. This is, like I said before, is a very cheap option, very cost-effective. Space doesn't cost a lot these days, so it is very cheap to have more space. It's very scalable, so if you start out and your database is very small, maybe a gig, and now your database is in terabytes, or your files are in terabytes, it's easy to scale that from a small level to a larger level. Disk to disk could be doing real-time updates. So you could have a real-time update instead of losing that day of processing. So you may only lose minutes versus days. And then the failover or the restore is rather quick. So it's you just have to point stuff to that location. So it's a lot quicker than having to restore. So you would have a chance to be up in a lot faster time period. So now your physical records. What do you do with your physical records? Many organizations have file cabinets in basements, in corners, in offices. What happens if your building goes up in a fire or a tornado takes it off the ground? What's going to happen to all those paper records? Where are they being stored? Now, this is good to do an inventory and figure out where are all your physical records, physical files stored. Is there a plan for what's going to happen to them in case of a disaster? Is it okay if we just lose them all? In a lot of cases, that's probably not the case. On a kind of a different note, do you know who's accessing those files, where they're stored now? So do you know who's going in and looking at those files? Do you have a way to track who's seeing those files? And are you adhering to any retention schedules? So if you are to keep your files for 7 years, are you actually getting rid of them after 7 years? Or do you have file cabinets that have 10, 20, 30 years of data in them? Here at Naviant, we have a record center, and we can store those files for you. The services that our record center offers is first, we offsite storage, so we can store all your paper boxes. We also have vault storage and media storage, so if you want your tapes to be offsite and you currently do not, you currently have an individual taking them home with them, we can actually take that media and put it into our vault, and we will take care of rotating that media and storing that media for you. We have a scan-on-demand service, so if we are holding your boxes and you need something, we could set up a plan where within an hour we would scan whatever document you're looking for and send it to you. We have same-day pickup and delivery of our boxes and records. Our conversion services team will scan all your images, or scan all your paper and convert it to images, and then give you those files so you can bring those into your OnBase system, such as using DIP. We do have retention, scheduling, and destruction. So if those boxes need to be destroyed after 7 years or 10 years, we can take care of destroying those for you. And then we also provide supplies, including boxes, to get those information to us. Now, we adhere to the National or Fire Protection Agency standards, so all your paper is safe. We wouldn't want that to be secure. And then we're also trained in regulatory compliance for HIPAA, which is part of the, if you're not sure, it's part of the medical industry for medical records and insurance. And then the also for GLB, which is your personal financial files for information. So we are compliant in both of those areas. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Chris, and he's going to give us a high availability solution.
Oh, thanks, Jen. It's great to know someone's out there to help me with my paper files and make sure that I get all those in an easy fashion, and I can store my media. But it's also, my account might be a little sad because all my backup tapes have been used hundreds of times, and I need to buy all new backup tapes because mine are old, so I need to update those. But now I want to talk a little bit about what if your solution needs to be high availability. So what if your solution is important enough and you want to be able to have instant access to all of your OnBase solution? Well, of course, we have to go to the cloud.
Ding!
For those of you who have seen all the Microsoft commercials, you know exactly what we're talking about. You don't have to just watch Celebrity Rehab in an airport to be able to enjoy the cloud. Hyland, in particular, has come up with a recovery service option that allows for you to be able to take a copy of your OnBase solution and put it into the to their hosted servers, and then on a real-time basis update all of those things that come in. So as documents come into your system, they go to your storage location locally, and then a copy goes up to the remote copy data center at Hyland, which of course is backed up, redundant, so on and so forth, and gives you the ability then, in the case of a disaster, to be able to remote access all of your data. So it's real-time, very little administrative coverage as far as your administrators go, and again, in the event of a disaster, you can get instant access to your data from virtually the point that the disaster started. Now this solution does only work with SQL servers, so if you're running Oracle, this solution would not work for that particular one, but there are other providers who can hopefully help you with that. So here's a little example of what happens. So you can see you got like Fujitsu 6010. You have documents scanning in, which is a great little scanner. Wendy loves that scanner. And documents, whether they're dipped, cold processed, however they get into your system, those documents go to your local server first, and then via secure FTP, those documents will get transferred over to the Hyland remote copy server. So a very simple solution. As you can see by the animation, scan them in, goes to your server, then secure FTP'd over to the data center at Hyland. Now, one of the cool features about this is you get DDS. And for those of you that don't have and 70% of our customers don't have DDS, which stands for Distributed Disk Service. And basically what that does is it reduces the risk. It provides a middleman, but reduces the risk of anybody accidentally accessing the documents. DDS provides for a user. It's a service that runs on your server that provides a single user access point into all of your image files. That DDS service is leveraged and then is used to copy the data over in a secure fashion to the OnBase remote copy site. You don't have to have any additional storage requirements, which of course is very nice because even though disk space is cheap, everybody's using more of it. So oftentimes we hear disk space is running low on various servers. You don't have to worry about having 2 copies on redundant servers internally. You could simply copy them up to their site. And DDS itself obviously prevents remote access into the disk group files themselves. So that's a great asset that comes with the service. Now in order to be able to use this service, the cool part is you get to be on any OnBase version. So if you haven't been good in keeping up with all of your upgrades, although we highly recommend you upgrade, you can still use this service. You do have to be running SQL Server, and you can be running SQL Server 2000. So even though it's quite an old SQL Server, it's still compatible. And then as I mentioned before, from a network perspective, they're going to use secure FTP to transfer all the data across the lines, including the transaction logs from your SQL Server to do log shipping, to get it to the Hyland remote copy service in a secure fashion. And then, as the last point indicates, you're going to use, basically it's just a web server. So if you have the web server today, you know what the interface looks like to immediately access your disaster recovery site hosted at Hyland. And the other thing they can do is provide you a disk back of all of your data so you can rebuild your servers. So not only can you get instant access via the web client, you can also get a copy of all of your data brought back for your new server in the event that your backups didn't work. Excuse me. So the package includes distributed disk service, as I mentioned. That license is a $5,000 license. You get that, and that will be effective on your system from day forward. So all of your documents that you bring in will be secured with distributed disk services. You also get the web server, which is just for remote copy only. So you can't use it internally from day one, but you can leverage that for accessing it in the event of a disaster. And finally, one of my favorite parts is they give you an annual failover test. Because as we had pointed out before, you always want to make sure that in whatever disaster recovery plan that you have, that you spend some time testing it. And so you'll work directly with Hyland and do a failover test to make sure users can access the system. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Wendy to go over some pricing with you.
Thank you, Chris. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. The average cost of irrecoverable data loss can be more than $10,000 per megabyte lost, according to a Pepperdine University report dated 2003.
Wow.
That brings us to the value proposition slide, your buzzword for today, value proposition. That just means how can having a high availability data recovery plan like OnBase remote copy service save you money? Number one, right off the top, it could potentially reduce your business interruption insurance by 10 to 25%. So you could take that right to your CFO. I didn't even know there was such a thing as business interruption insurance, so he might be interested in that. Number two, monthly expense versus capital expenditure. Because the cost of this service is amortized over a 12-month period, it doesn't affect your capital budget. So you're not paying for the cost of all the hardware, potentially another remote site, everything like that. You can spend your capital money on other things. It supports a disaster recovery and business continuity strategy. Your business may be legally required to have a disaster recovery plan and or a business continuity plan, and remote copy supports the OnBase component of your organization's overall plans in a really great way. It allows your personnel to focus on core business tasks. This goes back to that web server piece. All they have to do is log into the web server and they're accessing their data. They don't have to worry about when and how and where, they just log in. And the last point, it reduces infrastructure and management expenses. This goes back to that capital expenditure thing. By leveraging OnBase's online infrastructure, technologies, and data center, which are all audited and compliant, you're reducing your infrastructure and management expenses, and you're freeing up your key personnel to focus on core business tasks. So your IT person can worry about other things, not your data and what's happening with it. And that brings us to pricing. Grab your wallet.
Cut me a deal, Wendy.
As you can see here, the OnBase remote copy service is tier-based pricing, so tier by size. That size includes the database, the transaction log, and the image files. Most of our customers are going to fall into the top two tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2, so that looks pretty reasonable. $400 a month up to $700 a month for gigabytes of data storage. There's a one-time setup fee, which will be equal to whatever tier pricing that you're on. For example, if you have 370 gigabytes of data, 375, you will be at Tier 1, that's $400 a month. So your first invoice would be $800, the $400 setup fee, and then $400 for the monthly support. And then going forward, you would get an invoice of $400 a month. And there's other related services available on a per-use basis that are initiated at the customer request, and we can talk about those prices on a need-to-know basis. So just to reiterate what Chris said earlier, you are getting distributed disk services free. That's a $5,000 value. If you already have DDS, then the tool is installed on top of your existing DDS to facilitate the secure file transfer. You're also getting the web server license. In this case, as Chris mentioned, it's only for emergency user access and failover testing. There is a charge per day for unlimited user access, and then there are some customizable options if you don't need, if you have a few users or if you want other options for user access. And it's important to note that the customer is retrieving copied data. It's not live data that you're working with when you use web server.
Well, that's excellent, Wendy. $10,000 per megabyte versus $400 a month. Even my tight-wadded accountant won't mind that. So just to summarize the high availability, obviously it maximizes your uptime. So quick failover, people can access all of that data via the web instantaneously. As soon as you call the disaster, they'll get people switched over and they'll be able to access it. And the nice part is you only pay for the services you use. So Wendy can provide you an individualized quote for your organization. But essentially, if you don't ever have a disaster, it's only the $400 a month, like she indicated. So unless a disaster strikes, it doesn't cost you more. Where a lot of insurance, they anticipate it, so they charge you extra up front. Not with this service. Then, of course, you get the annual test to ensure that you're going to have availability and that your disaster recovery plan is effective. And it is very cost effective because, of course, as Wendy indicated, you don't have to worry about hosting and purchasing the hardware for redundancies. You don't have to have the IT staff attending to those new hardware and doing server updates and the maintenance and all those kind of things. It's all done for you automatically. So there's definitely a cost benefit there. And since most IT staff is overworked and running at 120% today, anytime you can save them with backups and disaster recovery is a good thing. And this is just one potential solution. As you can see here, there's several links, and there are a lot of providers out there, and you want to make sure that they're all certified and that they provide you with an SLA agreement so that you know what service level you're getting. But Rackspace, Secure24, CDW are all ones that provide server-related hosting for you and varying levels of service around that. So you can leverage a lot of that data transfer to a hosted solution, such as one of those, and get all of your data and a secure backup with high availability. And of course, it's a little bit more costly, but it gives you that immediate gratification of getting back online in a timely fashion. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Jennifer to talk a little bit more about validating backups.
Well, thank you, Chris, for all that wonderful information. We're now going to talk about, you're taking backups every day in a lot of cases. Now, do you know that the information on those backups is actually good? Now, validating that data is the process of confirming the integrity and completeness of that information. There's a couple things that you want to think about when you want to think about the validation of your data. Is the archive complete? So, are people still making changes when you're taking a backup? Then you might not have a complete archive. Did the files transfer properly? Did everything that was on your server get to your, if you're doing tape backups or if you're doing a disk-to-disk? Did everything get transferred properly? And are your files uncorrupted? Are we, if we have several disk groups that are missing files, or the files are all corrupted on your copy, it's not going to do you much good in a case of emergency. Because as I stated before, it would be, to compound a disaster would to find out that all of your data has been corrupted or not actually backed up. We have seen this quite a few times where people are doing backups, or at least they think they're doing backups every night, and they're actually not. So it is very, very important that we verify this data. So test your backups for accuracy. It's very important to do a restore. If you are doing tape backups, to do a restore of that information and have your people tested either monthly or quarterly to make sure that you are ready in case of a disaster. Now I just have one example here, but there are lots and lots of places that will do backup validations. Iron Mountain is another example that I didn't actually put on this slide, but that's another example. There's several places you can find on the internet that will validate your backups for you, and so that you know that they're good in case of an emergency.
Excellent work, Jen. So yes, if you don't take the time, if your IT staff doesn't have the time to do your own backup recovery testing, so actually restoring it to a spot to ensure that it is all valid and fully accurate, having a third-party help is always beneficial. So what have we learned a little bit about today? Well, of course, one of the key points is know your systems. You can be helped with that by getting a system audit from Naviant, but knowing all the pieces in place and what you need to have backed up and restored and who is affected by it is important. And then, of course, creating a plan. We provided you with a sample plan. Of course, there's many out there, but you want to make sure you take the time to get the responsibilities and get the plan drawn out on paper, and take that plan and save it electronically, and also print off a copy and store it in a secure location or several secure locations. It's obviously in the event of a disaster, not knowing what that disaster will be. If it's a fire and you only had a printed copy as your source document, that's not very helpful because it probably burned up. And if it's only stored electronically and you just lost your hard disk, that disaster took it out, so you don't know what happened. So have several different methods of storing that plan, and have several different people know where that is so that at any point in time you're covered. Make sure you're updating that plan regularly, and make sure you have all the organization involved. And then utilize third-party resources such as Hyland Recovery Services, ourselves for paper documents and audits, or any of the other third parties we listed in this agreement or you find on Google to help you with your disaster recovery needs. With that, we're going to tell you a little bit about the latest OnBase news. As you know, OnBase has released Service Pack 1 about 2 months ago. So we've had about 2 months of Service Pack 1 of OnBase Release 10. If you haven't upgraded yet, we highly recommend it. One of the coolest features, we absolutely love it, and it works great, is the haspless feature. So they've gone to a system tag that allows you not to have a hasp. And that is correct. You don't need a hasp for config. You don't need a hasp for dip. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So if you don't have it in your budget this year, you should consider getting it in, because this new release is fantastic. And even better yet, OnBase version 11 coming out this summer. So there's going to be a rewrite to the web client that will accommodate IE9. We'll talk about it a little bit more in a second. and they're going to add in a whole bunch of other new features that you might find beneficial. In addition, they're looking at right now, they're making iPad integrations. I know a lot of people love the iPad. iPad 2 just came out. You might have been up all night and a little tired today because you were waiting in line to get your iPad 2. If not, a lot of businesses are starting to use it, and Hyland is embracing it and adding integrations for that as well. So the first release of that may come in 11, but that's still pending. So just keep an eye out for that because it's very nice and very cool, cutting edge. And all of you should have received information regarding IE9. Internet Explorer 9 is coming out. It was actually released earlier this week. And of course, Microsoft, just like they did with IE8, was very nice, and they're gracefully letting you download it and install it yourself. Pretty soon, they're going to be pushing it out and asking you every day, please install, please install, please install. Well, Hyland is addressing that. There are some issues. For the most part, it does work with probably your current version of OnBase. However, there are several things that don't, especially eForms. So those of you that use eForms, make sure that when you get IE9 installed on a test machine that you do testing with it, and the Hyland is going to have IE9 fully compatible with version 11. So again, it's just being rolled out. It's very early. Hyland is addressing it, but we want to make sure you knew because you want to take the opportunity, if you can, to block the installation until it is certified. Because you will have a loss of functionality. If someone installs IE9 and you're running OnBase, any version of OnBase today, you will see some loss of functionality. So to avoid that, block it if you can. So that's the latest and greatest in OnBase news. So with that, we're going to open up to any questions. If anyone wants to throw anything in the chat, we'll be happy to take those. Otherwise, of course, you know how to get a hold of us. We love hearing from you. We've got our toll-free 800 number, 686-8789. Or we're always can be reached at support@naviant-inc.com. Again, don't be shy to get in contact with us. And we're not seeing any questions come through just yet. I know we gave you a lot to think about. It's probably all digesting, either that or your brains on green beer. We're not sure yet which, but if we do get any questions, we'll answer them as they come in. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Jen to let you know about the upcoming events.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we're actually here in April, so just about a month away. We are going to have a workflow design training class here. If you took the first workflow class, this workflow design is the advanced class. So to give you some more workflow information and training, in May then we'll have our system admin class, and then in June, or at the end of June, we will have our advanced system admin training. There are a lot more training scheduled for the rest of the year, so if you go out to our website, you can see a complete listing. Our next webinar will be May 19th. We do not have a topic at this point, so you can also watch our website for more information as to when we come up with that topic. But if you have any suggestions, please feel free to send them to support@naviant-inc.com, and we can take those into consideration and try to get those in the next webinar. Here's our contact information again, our phone number. You can contact us at support@naviant-inc.com. And to get a hold of Wendy about the pricing, if that is something that you have decided that your organization would like a quote about, you can get a hold of her at wcrockett@naviant-inc.com. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Have a great St. Paddy's Day, everybody. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on May 19th on our next webinar.